It is.
Okay, I see these two outstanding gentlemen who must be in charge of something there.
It just went off again.
Can you hear me?
Director Deere, we can hear you.
Good.
And we are ready to begin at your call.
Oh, this is a special board meeting, right? Okay, I'll call this meeting to order, and let's have a roll call, please.
Happy to do so, President Deere. Director Desi Alvarez.
Can't hear you.
Director Alvarez, you're on mute.
What now?
We can hear you.
Barely.
Director Gloria Gray.
Here. Here.
Director Scott Houston.
Here.
Director Harold Williams.
Here.
And President Don Deere.
Here. So we have the entire board. We have a quorum. Would you continue with the agenda?
Happy to do so. The next item that we have is item 3. It is public comment. We have not received any requests for public comment via our electronic system, although I do see that we have several members here, including Mr. Walter Lamb. Mr. Lamb, if you'd like to speak under public comment, we'll begin the timer.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. Forgive my outdoorsy appearance. I literally just biked back in a mad dash from the Bina wetlands, where I'm spending a lot of my time since the opening of the gates into Area A, which we're very, very happy about. I wanted to speak to you briefly about an issue that is very important to us, and it relates to the governance of the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission and the Santa Monica Bay National Estuary Program, for which the commission is the management conference.
Mr. Lamb, you've broken up a little bit and frozen. Can you hear us, Mr. Lamb? President Deere, it looks like we've lost Mr. Lamb under public comment. We will keep an eye out for him if he rejoins the meeting, and we can be happy to provide him with additional time to speak. We typically offer 3 minutes, and he used about 15 seconds, so we have about 2.5 minutes. So if he rejoins us, we can return to that item.
We'll give him all 3 minutes. He was interesting. Could you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
So the next item we have on our agenda is item 4. It's under presentations, and staff has no presentations today. And then item 5.
It in perspective as to why that's important. You know,
Mr. Lamb. Yeah, I believe Mr. Lamb has a bad connection. We'll reach out to him through the comment section and see if we can get him back on.
Okay, continue.
I apologize. So President Deere, that moves us to the action counter. We have no action items, and of course our information counter, which is why we're here today. As you're aware, West Basin staff has planned for several individual workshops to walk through the programmatic budgets that are being discussed this year and for the next fiscal year of 2022-2023. And there's no better time to discuss both the recycled water operations as well as our technical planning than just off the heels of Engineer Week at the tail end of February. So we do have 2 presentations for you today. I already see our Executive Manager of Finance, Margaret Moja, here to begin these presentations. She'll be kicking them off, but you'll notice that we have a handful of staff members, all of the program and project managers joining us today. So we're happy to discuss any of these items at any detail that you'd like. So with that, I'll hand it off to Margaret Mosier.
Thank you, and good morning, directors. We're glad to have you here today to hear more about our programmatic budgets, as EJ has indicated. As we shared with you back in January at the January F&A Committee Finance and Administration on the 19th, we provided you a number of priorities that we wanted just to share with you as the sort of the basis, if you will, of the items that we would consider for the fiscal year 22-23 budget. And as a basis of understanding what those priorities are, we wanted to provide you now sort of the intimate details, if you will, of what the budgets represent to meet those priorities and also the ongoing expenses for us to manage these operations here at West Basin. So if I could turn your attention to page 7 of the presentation or of the slides of your board packet. One more page, please. Again, I wanted to always begin just to remind us that the reason why we're here as West Basin is to provide a safe and reliable supply of high quality water to the communities we serve. That is our mission, and all the activities that we are doing here is in that is to meet that mission statement. So let's go forward to page 8 of the presentation. And I wanted just to kind of touch upon why we're approaching the budget this way and getting you sort of more into the details. From the comments received by the board members through last year's presentation and throughout the year, they wanted to see more detail, and the district staff is ready to provide that to you. We do have a variety of information that we can share with you and want to meet you where you are comfortable and hearing the information. So the information we have here today is going to talk about 2 budgets, program budgets. One is the Recycle Water Operations budget, and the other one is technical planning. And then we do have other separate meetings to go over the other program budgets. So just to orient us on sort of the information that we have here today, we wanted us to kind of, first of all, share with you what is our overall dollars for the fiscal year 22-23 for the Recycle Water Operations. You can see there's a number of categories that represent the costs that are important for us here. We've kept them sort of somewhat to a high level component, if you will, and we can certainly share more details as we go through the presentation. But you see for fiscal year 22-23, we show $48 million in expenditures. Now, one thing I wanted to also share with you is that rather than all of these program budgets that we're sharing with you are going to provide you an opportunity to hear sort of the underlying assumptions so that when we come back to you on April 13th, you're going to see all the revenues and all the expenses, and you'll have a better understanding of when we put it all together, what those numbers represent. And so we wanted just to make sure, like I said, to spend some time here with that. So for Recycle Water Operations, again, we're here to share the cost for you for the treatment, distribution, water quality compliance of our existing recycled water system. And to support the, and then the Operations Department also does support the potable water deliveries within West Basin. But the focus of this particular budget is really about the Recycle Water Operations. Again, the objective that you see there, I'll just go towards the end, is that, again, the department is striving to make sure that they adhere to our operations, water quality monitoring, reporting, asset management, customer engagement, emergency response, handling the supply chain management, cost control, and those connections. So to make sure that we provide this recycled water to this region here. One other thing I wanted to explain to you, and we've discussed, if you will, the district staffing at the February 23rd workshop. And in that workshop, we just sort of told you in general, sort of here are all the staff that are here for West Basin. But again, as we share ourselves out on the program budgets, staff is able to charge their time to where they put their efforts on. So again, where do we have our energies being focused on? And what's nice about this sort of programmatic budget is that you see that there is times where there is a crossover between departments. And so while you might know of a certain number of individuals that might be in a particular department, they might be putting their efforts in different places. So we've shared with you a little bit more information too, as it relates to the budget year. For fiscal year 22-23, you can see an FTE full-time equivalent of employees of 17.08. Now, that doesn't mean that there are 17 positions that are within the operations department. What that means is that there are efforts when we look at both the direct and indirect individuals that charge there. So to
What page are we
clarify,
on?
I'm
Excuse me,
sorry,
what
we're on
page?
page 8 of the packet.
Okay, thank you.
My apologies. Thank you.
I thought we were, but I don't see full-time employees. So I'm
My apologies. FTE full-time employees,
right.
right at the
Where
bottom
is
of the
it?
page. At the bottom of the page in the blue chart. And so we're showing you in fiscal year 22-23, 8.82 of direct labor. Those are individuals that would come directly from the operations department or other departments that you see there. And the indirect department represents, those are the overhead individuals that represents anyone from finance, HR, administration, and the executive team. And so you can see that 8.82 of time is being allocated, of individuals, I should say, is being allocated here, and 8.26 of indirect time, 17.08. That gives you that total that you see in the upper left-hand corner where you see labor and benefits of $3.3 million. Now, again, labor and benefits, that's both the labor portion as well as the benefit factor, which again, we shared at last month's workshop that it was going to be about 80%. So with that, I wanted to turn to the next page, which is page 9 of the presentation or the PDF. This provides you a summary of our recycled water operations. And what we have done traditionally is to provide you this sort of comparative analysis between the fiscal year 2021, those are the actual results of the year. So $39,000 that were spent there to produce about 34,000 acre feet of recycled water. And then the next column over fiscal year 21-22 is the projected number. So we anticipate spending just under $41 million. And you can see that cost is what we anticipate to be about 24,600 acre feet of sales. And as you know, that was a difficult, or has been a difficult year with us with the Hyperion spill early on and us having to address that supply chain challenges. And you'll hear those comments as we learn more about this particular budget. And so you compare that second column over to the third column, which is the fiscal year 21-22, where we show that we had a budget of $42.5 million. That number there, again, was what we anticipated to be able to produce in the year. We had hoped to be able to produce 34,200 acre feet, but again, as I mentioned, and what you'll hear more about is that the recycled water sales had a bit of a hit this year with the Hyperion spill, supply chain challenges, that as a result of that, you saw that we've had higher costs to produce less acre feet of water. And then finally, the last column that you see there, that fiscal year 22-23 column, you see a $48.5 million in costs. And again, now when you compare budget on fiscal year 21-22 to the 22-23, you can see there is a large increase that's there. And we will be going through those variances for you. And those are what the boxes in red represent. So you see that variance percentage. And those are the boxes that we will spend more of our time on trying to describe to you what are the reasons behind some of those assumptions there. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the next page, which is page 10 of your PDF. And this is, again, just to provide you a comparative analysis, sort of in a graphical format, the last 4 years worth of budgets. And you can see that we have been pretty steady within our budgets for the last few years. But then you can see that we've had some significant cost increases anticipated for the fiscal year 22-23 year. You'll not only see it, but sort of in total, but by category. So you can see that sort of that lighter green, if you will, sort of there is what our chemical increases. And so that's one of those items that you've seen that where we've had some significant increases. And we've already experienced that in this past year, knowing that we've had to come back to you on a more frequent basis to ask for the board's approval to have a higher rate with the certain vendors, if you will. And with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Uzi, who will take to the balance of the presentation here, but I am available as well to answer any questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Uzi.
Fantastic. Thank you, Margaret, and good morning, directors. If I could ask for the next slide, which is on page 11 of your packet, I will go through some of the assumptions, some of the basis, explain how we come up with these numbers. Susanna Lee is with us. She is our senior engineer in ops and really serves as our budget analyst along with some of the supervisors, so we can dig into some of those details if they're not answered within this presentation. The operations budget, as Margaret alluded to, important is the recycled water operations budget, and this is the proposed budget. And that is very important to distinguish from the potable water side, which our operations staff deals with quite a bit. And in addition to any assistance we might do or participate in CIP projects, because of course you want to make sure that your operations and your engineering are working together to design efficient programs. Those are not included in this budget, but in other budgets. For operations budget, obviously it's all our recycled water facilities, including the satellites, distribution, pump stations, a lot of the optimization efforts, maintenance, monitoring for all of our regulatory requirements, and of course the distribution system. And if we could have the next slide, please. This is a nice representation. I always appreciate pie charts, kind of gives you a nice visual of where a lot of the money, the budget is allocated to. As you can imagine, chemicals, we've updated the board various occasions of what's happening with chemicals. Utilities, we all, even in our personal lives, experience what's the cost of those, in addition to the operations and labor. So we can get a nice visual here. And if we go to the next slide, we also see a pie chart that helps break down where our water portfolio is, what the production is. And what is so important about looking and calculating and estimating our demand projections is that's how we make our budget estimates. We use what we're going to produce to calculate how much of utilities we intend to spend, how much chemical we intend to use. You can see here the refinery demands are a big portion of that, and we've broken down in this pie chart the various satellite and refineries, but we base that on the past 3 years. We also do talk, we have good communication with the refinery staff is great. We do meet with them some quarterly or annual basis, and we learn when are they going to have shutdowns? Are they going to have any major work that would require them to use less or more water? In addition, we have to estimate what we need to do at the different satellite facilities. The barrier demand is based specifically on what the county has projected they need for the barrier. That's assessed with them in WRD each year. And then we do also include in that our ability to produce. So for example, we all know that with the upset that occurred, we did suffer some damage of membranes. We're in the process of replacing those. So we're not at full production yet. So we have to take all of that into consideration, try to schedule out when these changes will occur, and be able to project that demand, again, to use for our budget calculations. Finally, we do sort of the same principle here on the disinfected tertiary. And I want to point out that that 12% is for our customers, the over 300 customers we have, but the water does still serve, those lines do still serve all of our satellite facilities, but that's captured in the refinery demands there. And if we could have the next slide, please. Here we have a nice representation with a look back of these projections. These same projections we use to calculate the proposed budget. You can see for the projection of this year that we'll have a lot lower projected number, and that is almost solely due to the upset that occurred that affected us for 6 months. Still some latent effects that we are experiencing. Some upsets. We will cover that in our E&O meeting, but we see here why that projection is lower. But we're hopeful and we're planning for fiscal year 22-23 to be a lot better and be able to get up to meet those demands, because as we know, the more we produce, the less acre foot per acre foot cost that we have. So it's just more efficient. So that is our goal in the operations department, is to make sure that we can be in compliance, that we can serve our community, we can meet our budget and be as efficient as possible with that. Next slide, please.
Uzi. Do you mind holding on for 1 second? I see that Director Alvarez has a question.
Oh, my apologies.
Usually on illustration you have. Under this.
Director Alvarez, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, I can't.
Hear
I
me better
apologize.
now?
I can't.
You hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so under other disinfectant tertiary demands, 12%, there's 2 bullets. The second bullet incorporates anticipated new customers to be connected in the next fiscal year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can
You
you
close the door.
expand on that?
Here, wait. I'll get it.
Sure. And let me repeat, Director Alvarez, your question to make sure. You'd like me to expand on the 2 different bullets under disinfected tertiary, in particular, the new customers. And that is, we have agreements or we have some pretty exciting customers that are coming into the future. So when people have come to us, or maybe we've started the process of some agreements which come to the board, we have to use that to calculate and anticipate when the connection will be made. And if it's made in that fiscal year, we try to then incorporate that into our calculations for the proposed budget. Frank can go into some of that detail if you'd like to hear about some of those customers. I will tell you right now, some of the exciting news is a lot of the sports complexes are relocating to Inglewood, to El Segundo. They come to us with money. They want recycled water, therefore they're willing to pay for that. But they still require agreement, which we then bring to the board. Does that answer the question, Director?
Maybe you can send the information over later. I want to know who the anticipated new customers are specifically. I know you mentioned complexes. And then how much water it is that they're going to be served.
Fabulous. Frank, if you can note that, that'd be great. Not a problem. We do keep a list of that. It's an activity that is highly maintained in the distribution division. So absolutely, we can get that to you.
And if I could also add for the conversation here, we do plan on sharing more detailed information as well on our April 6th workshop that is focused in on our water sales assumptions. As you know, that our potable water sales and our recycled water sales, as Uzia has already alluded to, are highly dependent upon sort of what our assumptions are there. So we will show you some trend information, and we'd be happy to also separate from that conversation, included into that presentation too, so that you can see where we're at today, what we intend to increase, and how it might look into the future as well.
Fabulous. Okay.
And
Thank you.
This is Board Member Houston. Let me ask a very quick question, please. You have on here barrier demands around 31%. What have we been averaging? I thought it was, am I wrong? I thought it was around 20% in the past, but can you just quickly enlighten me on that?
Yeah, I don't know, Susanna, if you want to answer that. I don't have the tables up. We can bring you the barrier comparison specific to that to look at the past. Happy to do that. And what percentage it is. We typically are around, we try to target this number, but Susanna, do you have handy with you maybe some of the past pull up real quick?
Yeah, this 31% has been the average for the past 3 years compared to, if you go back to the previous pie chart, it shows all the breakdowns of those percentages represent the last 3 years productions.
Okay, so in other words, it sounds like it's more consistent to what it's been the last 2 to 3 years.
Correct.
So I was off. I was off in what I thought it was. So we actually are doing more of a percentage than I realized. Okay, very good. And I know you'll talk more about that in the water sales presentation.
Right, and just to give you a sort of a context for today, just so that you're aware of it, you know, barrier is one that will be a variable, if you will, in our water production, and it has been as high as 13,000 acre-feet per year, and this year, unfortunately, because of the situation that we've had, is that we're estimating about 2,000 acre-feet. But again, if we assume that we're going to be back to regular production of where we anticipate, and we do have a conversation with WRD and the county to get those assumptions as well, we're working with them to understand what is it their needs are and meeting them at those needs. And so we're anticipating about 11,600 for this current fiscal year 22-23.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Perfect. And I might add, Director Houston, that in addition, that as you know, during the upset, we shut the barrier down. 2 reasons: for compliance, because it's a very different permit with very stringent standards, and it goes into the groundwater. And also, when we have upsets, what we've learned is we may want to shut it down. We've worked with the county to preserve our membranes and our system. If we get real bad upsets, we don't want to go through that again. So we may see that fluctuate, and that's also why I know Susanna each month likes to update us so we can keep up with that, because it's a great point. Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Then if we could proceed to the next slide, there we are, and that's on page 15 of your packet. So now we get into some of the details of the pie that we saw earlier, and that's related first to West Basin labor and benefits. I know Margaret had done a nice job of explaining the difference between the FTEs, the full-time equivalents, if, for example, folks are working on projects. But as far as bodies in the operations department, we currently have 9 full-time funded staff, and 1 additional that was left due to a retirement open and not funded last year, that we propose to refund this year. And I'll get into some more detail on that, on some of the requirements that will require us to have that position. You can also see here the different staff, and I'll go into detail. Actually, if we want to go to the next slide, we can see that we have a little more detail on how these numbers have worked out. And for reference, as we try to be efficient here, as an agency, we don't have a lot of redundancy on staff compared to maybe other places I have worked. And that's okay. We've got a lot of talent here. Everyone is very proud to serve their community. So we try to be efficient. Where can we combine things? We merged an ops analyst position with the GIS specialist position. That position, also the GIS also serves others in the entire district, or I should say in all the other departments when we need maps, exhibits, might even be for board meetings, in addition to working on our distribution system and other things required for operation. They will also be assisting with some of these inspections and modifications that need to occur. We eliminated an ops analyst 2 in the past as well. And we did at one point also have part-time or full-time, but temporary basis staff augmentation. That's someone that really concentrated on a few projects, some of them capital-based for operations, mainly around electrical. We also then temporarily suspended the water quality compliance position in the past, and that is the one we're proposing to bring back. And you can see here the proposed fiscal year budget for labor down there of slightly over $3 million. That does include refunding that position. And if you can go to the next slide, please, I can give a little more detail on the refunding of that as we work through. In our department, and along with our executive manager and finance and our general manager, we looked at where we could reposition certain functions. As we all know, and this could be a good thing, depending on what end you're on, regulations aren't getting easier. I have never in my career seen less monitoring or anything. And that's the reality, but that's okay as we become more aware of environmental issues and how we can protect our communities. We have had such a good relationship with regulators that we were able to last year request that we did not proceed with the new Title 22 permit. We were able to do a few things that allowed us. We put off our audits. We put off any SOPs. We were able to work with them to wait on obtaining our new AQMD permit. None of these are out of compliance. These were all based on what we could do and work with our regulators legitimately. There are a few things now, though, now that has come to roost. We're going to have new brine permits, 2 new brine permits within this fiscal year. Actually, we're already starting the law, and that's with the EPA. They don't give the feds, they don't give a lot of leeway there. We're going to have to apply for the new general permit. That was required within 5 years of the old permit. Again, we got some leniency, but that's going to be a new Title 22 permit. That actually makes more accountability to all of our customers, which is a good thing for them, requiring a little more tracking and monitoring. We're also going to be having this position, and as we balance this department, restaff it, working on some of our AQMD issues. Department of Toxic Substance Control, that has to do with our hazardous waste management, optimizing, trying to do things. We have an example at the Brewer project of where we really tried to recycle, reuse things. And that's actually being encouraged in a lot of regulation, but it takes a little time. You have to develop programs. And as mentioned, just getting back to going into our regular internal audits and having the ability to do some of that QA/QC, regulation review, and being prepared for what's coming our way. And if we could go to the next slide, please. That brings us to our contract labor, which is the Suez and Inframark contracts, one for our treatment plant facilities and one for our entire distribution system. You can see here for the treatment plant, that is based on a contract. The newest one, the most recent one, I should say, began January of 2020, where we reduced a number of positions. We've had time to evaluate and see where there might be some efficiencies. We are proposing, and we have a justification within that contract to bring one position in, and that is a senior SCADA electrical technician. That's something that we see very important. A lot of us are aware you need to have eyes on your system. You need to be able to, especially as we mentioned with compliance, we have a lot of online analysts, some process control things, and we need to be able to have that data to calculate, to make adjustments quickly and on the spot. And that became very evident during the upset. So what we're doing is recommending to have this technician on board. Will be very helpful. Will also help us with any transition so there are no gap. And that is something that's proposed in the Suez budget. The distribution contract operations has a superintendent and 2 operators typically during that. And we have that budget included as well. And that is staying somewhat similar. We did learn some lessons during the upset, always take the positive out of things. And we realized how spot chlorination and some additional sampling is actually has helped us, and we're continuing with that practice to make sure we are serving the best water quality to our customers. In the next slide, please, continues with the contract labor. Then we have a little bit of a look-see here. Oh, sorry,
I
I apologize. I can't see the hands. I'm sorry, Director.
Nope.
That's all right, Uzi. It's kind of tough to do this virtually, but anyways, on the issue of the contract operator, you mentioned that the contract went into effect in January of last year, or of 2020, I'm sorry, 2 years ago. When is that contract up?
2024.
2024. Okay. And there's an automatic increases in that contract if I read this or understand this correctly?
Yes, it is. It includes the ECI, which is kind of like the cost of living, but it's actually an employment cost index plus 2%. And then there's some complicated, bless the finance department and Susanna, on the fringe benefits and an average over 5 years. And I will let you know that the ECI, I was kind of curious to check with the ECI. It's based always on the 4th quarter of the end of the year. And for private companies, it's at 4% the last quarter. So plus 2% would be the 6%.
So, assuming they do not add any positions, cost or track, operations at the treatment plant are going to go up by 6%?
on the labor, and then the fringe, and I don't know if Margaret, this is something you can speak to more, but then there's also the fringe benefit calculation that changes just slightly each year because it's based on a 5-year look back rolling average. And so sometimes and we could get that number, I want to say, I don't know if Susanna, you have that, but there might have been a slight change in that as well this year.
Yeah, it's anticipated that, we're still reviewing the numbers. We audit the number, if you will, but it does anticipate that will dip slightly from where it is currently today, less than 1%. But it is something that we have incorporated their assumption as to what that new 5-year rolling average would be. And so, to your point, yes, the contract does stipulate the ECI plus 2%, and so that has been incorporated into the budget. So, based off of the agreement.
So the total increase, assuming they do not add any new positions for just the contract labor at the treatment plant, will be 7%, a little under 7%.
Should be. I need to look at these, because there's other things that go into the contract besides just the labor. But if I hear you correctly, Director, you're requesting just the labor portion of that contract.
I'll come back to the others, but right now that's what you had put up. So I was just asking for clarification on that
Okay.
item. Because then you're showing that we're going to add an additional technician, so that above and beyond just the costs that are going to be increased, we're going to increase it by additional position. So my question slash comment is, I understand that this is a contract that we'd entered into. We are in a very difficult environment, and it may behoove us to go back to Suez and try to renegotiate some of these terms, because this is a very expensive contract, and in my opinion, not in the best interest of the district, but we're burdened with it at least through 2024. So it would behoove us to maybe try to renegotiate some of these terms and the way they staff up in order to control our costs a little bit better. We're going through this whole budget process, and I think that we have a lot of increases in costs that we're facing, and at a time we're not in the best position to really increase our overall water sales, therefore our revenue base. And I really am not supportive of a large increase in our water rates, as those are already extremely high.
And I'll mention also, it's worth mentioning that we do try to internally negotiate as we come to each year, because those are great points. The ECI was used this year, but they did not apply the 2%, kind of recognizing. So sometimes there is a little wiggle room where we can, agree that we need an extra body before we need this % increase. So we have, even within the contract, there's a little wiggle room for us to bring up important parts and, agree on what's really needed to keep the plant operating properly. And so those are points we can bring more detail in. And I know that, we listed a 7.46% increase to that in labor. And I want, that does include that added position. It was very light last year. There was a lot of savings last year for unpleasant reasons. Of course, they lost 3 of their staff. When I lost as in passed away, in addition to positions that during COVID may have been unfilled. And so we had a savings in labor last year. And that's what we're looking to do now, is to get to the right positions and what is needed. We've worked pretty hard on trying to assess, audit things that we can, decide between operations and maintenance, where do those fall? And luckily our contract operators are typically accommodating to that. So Director, we're welcome to work with these suggestions within the contract. And I guess I don't know if when we're inside a contract, how renegotiating an existing one, but I'll leave that to our executive management to let us know how that might work, or a legal department.
And if I may add,
It's not necessarily the easiest thing. That's why I just said it may be something we just need to try to do. And Suez needs to understand that we do need to control costs and that they're a critical part of our overall budget and a big component of our total cost structure. I'm not supportive of adding that new, having them add any additional positions when I look at the fact that they've got 6 positions. I think that they can adjust the budget and without increasing it, and maybe even look at decreasing some of their staffing.
If I may add, Dr. Alvarez, good morning, everybody. If I may add a couple of notes, when we did enter into that agreement with Suez, one of the things was we did reduce their staff numbers. And the way the agreement is set up is that every year we have the ability to look at staffing levels and determine whether an increase is necessary. They submitted requests for more than this position, and we've asked them to put in the justifications for those. And we've rejected a couple. This one, due to the several factors that Uzi touched on, and also to the fact that we are going to be embarking on an overhaul of our DCS system in the next few years. That's part of the reason why staff is proposing this. But your notes are taken into consideration, of course.
Just to be clear, I'm not supportive of it. I don't think it's necessary, and I'm not convinced by the arguments.
Noted.
Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, and always good to know so we can improve on our end as well with the communication. So, okay, then if we could go to the next slide, we'll go to chemicals, and that is on page 20 of your packet. And this is related to our chemical expenditures, which are a big portion of water treatment. And for public out there, the chemicals are a part of drinking water, wastewater. They're just a needed part. I say that because I know in my drinking water industry that sometimes shock people that there were chemicals involved, but it is important. And anytime we have upsets and anytime the water quality or influent water quality is poor, we require more chemicals. That combined with, as we've noted in a lot of our updates, our committee updates, the commodities right now of these chemicals, it has been quite extraordinary, the increases. We have a lot of vendors who, as you know, have been coming back to us requesting additional funding, telling us they might have to stop or be in breach of contract. Their own raw material suppliers are only giving them month-to-month forecasts. We right now at this time, to bring back to the board, we're asking them to just extend. We're looking for costs to extend just to December on our current contracts, because we know getting 1-2 years is tough. So we will have a better indication. They are due tomorrow. So we'll have a better indication of this cost increase. But right now you can see the level, and a lot of that is out of our control, even some of our vendors' control. It's hitting all the water agencies. A lot of groups are working on this. And this is where we're also trying to optimize anything we can to bring down those costs are important. And that is what you will also see in the proposed budget. And the next slide gives a little more detail from a different portion of that. Thank you. You can see how that breaks down with the bulk and mini bulk. We have some specialty chemicals. Again, that's with advanced water treatment and membranes. They take a lot different chemicals and cleaning and specialty, sometimes proprietary chemicals, in order to maintain that indirect or future direct potable reuse. At the bottom there, you can see the increase that we're expecting, that we have forecast. Again, that's based on just the trends that we're seeing. We're hoping the market stabilizes. At think it's all over the news, and we will have even more information by tomorrow on what our current contract prices, what everyone's proposing through the end of the year, so we can come back and update the board on that. If we proceed to the next slide, please, we will see there the utilities. And those are something also that can greatly impact our cost depending on the utility market. As we all know, we locked into a direct access program for some savings, which is great because unless someone hasn't turned on a TV or read a paper in some time, the energy costs and utility costs are going to be going up. We see that now. So we have a locked in price here. That might affect some of the other things that we're not locked into, but as of now, we anticipated an overall 15% increase with a 7.5% increase on energy costs. That was because we did take into consideration the savings that we hope to get from that direct access program. And this is also something we continually are looking at optimizing. How can we make some small incremental changes in that? We have solar, we are looking into things, battery storage, being able to use treatment at optimal hours. There's a lot of those efficiencies that the department is working with Suez and Inframark to work on. If we go to the next slide, facility maintenance slide there, of course, facilities require maintenance. And this is just a nice explanation what goes into maintenance, because sometimes even myself in the beginning, for me, I thought, how does this fit in here, especially when I saw treatment admin. But you can see here how the budget is broken down, facilities maintenance. To forecast, we look at the past maintenance. We use our asset management, which is getting stronger and stronger each year. We look at that to anticipate the age of equipment, if it's capital or not, and what we might need to do to increase and calculate that, again, based on needed maintenance. This doesn't include the emergency repairs as we have in there. If you have a sudden emergency repair, this budget is basically some preventative and some corrective maintenance. Also, you see uniforms, office supplies, vehicles, the landscaping at our facilities, janitorial, all of those things are included. And in addition, in distribution, we highlight here more specifically for our distribution system, these are the things that we include in our maintenance. And we even, some of them, we have certain goals that we want to achieve each year, how many valves we want to exercise, replace, meter replacements based on our asset management. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see another look where you can look back at this and see some of the things that we are doing in maintenance that attribute to that increase. And I will say again here, since this does include goods and service, and we all know with inflation and the cost of goods going up, that's also why you see that cost increase. We did try to anticipate what we see is some of the trend in some of these supplies and the costs going up to either perform that work or mostly to purchase some of these supplies. And if I could ask that you would proceed to the next slide. And at this point, we're on page 25 of our packet. Solids management is something that is directly impacted by influent water quality. This saw a huge increase during the upset, and we have some of our assumptions here, and we actually did try to make assumptions. How many small upsets can we anticipate? How does that work into production, our anticipated production? Also, the difference between the disposal and the beneficial reuse. I'll mention, as we had stated earlier, we will have to renew our 2 brine permits. The brine permit for ECL has an entire federal solids management attachment to it. That is an EPA requirement that is not administered by the state. When we receive that new brine permit, maybe within this fiscal year, we will then possibly see an adjustment on what what kind of regulation they have that might impact this. As of now, we've tried to anticipate all of that. We're also going out to bid for new contracts for solids. And if you go to the next slide, I'll tell you some of the things that have hit the solids, please, the solids hard. Obviously the upset, but some of the other things that are really impacting us are the fuel charges, truck driver shortages, higher wages. And this is something that plays even into our own labor. Is the bottom line is we're, how do you stay competitive? It really hurts us when we can't get the solids trucks here. We have aged equipment. It does break down frequently. Right now, we're only down to one filter press. That requires a lot more labor in that instance because we don't have that. That also requires us to work out how we get these solids drivers. And if they are missing, what happens is that it affects our operations. We have to pull out the vacuum trucks. And the driver shortage has greatly impacted us as they try to offer higher wages to attract more truck drivers. And I think that's a truck driver issue for many other industries, not just our own, but it impacts us. And if we'd like to go to the next slide, please. This is something that we are actually have gone down in, but nice to bring up. It's a small portion of our budget, but with laboratory services, also nice to celebrate when we're able to make efficiencies and bring our budget and our costs down. Our laboratory services encompass quite a bit. 3 different contract laboratories, chemistry labs, microbiology, in addition to specialty labs for the toxicity. Those go back to the brine permits, which are very complicated, have many studies, and require many different types of sampling. We have those on contract, in addition to our own laboratory operated by Suez. And you can see down there how many samples and analysis that help us manage day-to-day operations, make some changes, and process control, in addition to compliance, and where those costs actually go to, the majority with Barrier, especially with some of the newer requirements. However, we were still able to lower some of those costs this year. And if we could go to the next slide, and I believe one of the final slides.
Susie,
Oh,
can
I'm
we go
sorry,
back to
Director.
that? Before you leave the last slide.
Sure.
On the laboratories, a laboratory that we call our own laboratory, which is operated by Suez. It would be nice to be able to just get rid of that laboratory. I understand that there's always a convenience factor, and I've heard that argument, but since we have 3 other laboratories and a specialty lab, and that have that operation contracted out as part of the overall laboratory services, I'm sure that the other laboratories can pick up those functions. But I'd like to see that explored. I understand that there is a convenience factor of having a laboratory there that you just kind of just say, do this today versus calling and having a sample picked up. But
sure, we can look into that and work with Suez more. I've actually tried to reach out to see if anyone had done analysis. I'm not aware. I'd welcome any feedback of any treatment facility, wastewater or treatment facilities that don't have at least process control labs. We still would have to get all those bottles and analyses out. We have to respond quickly, but we're happy to look into that a little bit more. And I just say that because beyond convenience, it's more like compliance and response time, which is required. And I wouldn't want to jeopardize that. Maybe there's a balance, but that's something we can investigate. And then if we could go then to the final slide, please. This is just the others cost. This some of these costs we were able to bring down as well. You can see some of those secondary influent. I know someone had asked a question, a different presentation. That is the water. That is our influent water. We often say influent water. That is the chunk we pay to this city for that water that we treat into our 5 qualities. Insurance permits, of course. are a good chunk. And then the consultants. Consultants is lumped together, but those are consultants required for not just optimization studies, condition assessments, things of that nature, or assisting with modification, customer development to comply with our Title 22 permit, but also for other permit compliances. For example, we do not have in-house ability to do groundwater modeling, and those reports required every year for the barrier permit. We do not have in-house ability to do the monitoring well sampling and wastewater hauling. Those are all done through contracts, and those are lumped into consultants. And then, oh, yes, Director.
Yes, I have a question or suggestion. On the consultant, I heard what you said. Still think that there might be an opportunity to look at that overall budget or our staffing levels, one or the other. But for example, on the groundwater modeling, is that something maybe we can talk to WRD? They have a groundwater model, and maybe they can assist in that and provide that service. I don't know how
So
much tweaking.
it's
I'd have to
interesting.
look and see how much tweaking the groundwater model is going to require to meet the conditions of what we need done. But I think that is something within the doable. And so just a suggestion of things that can be done to maybe look at the overall consultant expenditures and also to reach out and work with other agencies. That's it. Thank you.
Great. No, I love that. We have reached out to WRD, and I think they actually use the same consultant, believe it or not, that we do for groundwater modeling for the compliance. However, maybe there's an economies of scale. Maybe there's an ability for us to get together and still make that a little more economical. Great. And I believe with that, the next slide, I believe that is it. And then we have staff and everyone available to answer any questions. Thank you.
That was a very, very good report and very good responses to the concerns. Thank you very much. We'll go on to the next item.
Yes, President Deere, before we do move on, I wanted to check if we have any members of the public. As you know, Mr. Lamb dropped off. I don't know if he's still with us, but I wanted to give him this quick opportunity to make a public comment. I do not see him. So then we will. Oh, yes, Walter.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have a comment on this particular item, so would you like me to wait until after this item is finished?
Yeah.
No, I apologize, Mr. Lamb. You broke up in the middle of your public comment, and so we lost most of it. We could not hear you. And so I was going to offer you an additional few minutes to address the board.
Oh, and I would appreciate that. Is now the right time for me to do that?
Why don't we do that now? Because I know that you got cut off earlier.
Okay, I appreciate that. I appreciate that flexibility. Yeah, I'll try to keep this quick. Obviously, you just got a very detailed and very interesting presentation, so I'll try not to put too much more information in front of you. But as you know, the West Basin Municipal Water District has long had representation on the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission, which is the management conference for the Santa Monica Bay National Estuary Program. And what we've been asking for about 4 months now is a better clarity as to the extent of the commission's authority in steering the National Estuary Program and directing the work of NEP staff. And if you don't mind, I was just going to look at well, I don't have it up front of me, I'll just paraphrase, but you in your governance documents have very clear delineation about the relationship between you, the board, and your staff through the general manager. And that's the same kind of clarity that we're seeking for the National Estuary Program. In other words, that the governing board of the commission has the same relationship to the NEP director as you, governing board members, have to your staff through the general manager. And we're just not getting that, even though it was promised on several occasions, including through West Basin staff communications. And so what we're asking is for the representatives, Director Gray and General Manager Caldwell, I've been working with you guys for a long time. You know that we're always, just trying to sort of find resolution to these things. And so the ask would be that just at a meeting, you could actually ask for that information. It's not just that we have it, but so that you have it. And we think that better communication and clarity on that will benefit all of the things that West Basin cares about, all of the things that stakeholders care about, everything from sea level rise to greenhouse gas emissions to public access to biodiversity. Things just work better when there's transparency and accountability. So that's my ask, and I'm, as always, willing to provide more information, more detail, but would definitely appreciate your help on that. Thank you very much. I appreciate the flexibility today too with the bad connection earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb.
Mr. Chair, this is Director Gray.
Please enter your password, then press pound.
Hello? Hello?
You have
President Deere,
Yeah.
Hello?
Director Gray would like to speak.
Yes, let her speak. Go ahead, Director Gray. Hello?
Is it appropriate for me just to comment or just to
Go ahead,
make some
sure.
comments on? Thank you. I know Mr. Lamb has made a request. I think Mr. Caldwell has tried to be helpful with that. I don't know what the status is, but I appreciate Mr. Lamb bringing it to the board. So perhaps we can decide as a board how to address it, but I just want to acknowledge what the request is of Mr. Lamb, and we'll see what we can do in terms of response to Mr. Lamb. So thank you.
Very good.
Thanks so much.
Okay, let's move on, and we'll bring up these concerns at the appropriate time. Go ahead, Mr. Manager.
Yes, thank you very much, President Deere. The next item that we have for you is item 6B. It's our fiscal year 2022-2023 program budget for our technical planning. And again, for the introduction of this item, we do have our Executive Manager of Finance, Margaret Moja.
Good morning again, directors. And yes, before you today, we do have our technical planning budget. And if I can ask you to go to the next slide, please. And then one more slide, if you will. So beginning on page 35, if your hard copy printout of the agenda, we have for you today the technical planning budget, the proposed budget for fiscal year 2022 to 2023. As you see here, there are a number of items that are included, including staff time associated to these projects, as well as the intended consultant. The project share that you see there, that is the cost that if we continue our conversation and dialogue with the City of Los Angeles as it relates to the MBR project, that would be the anticipated project share based off of the latest discussions that are there. But you'll hear more about that in the conversation here. Just to remind you, the technical planning isn't a specific department per se. This is one in which where I mentioned before, where we have this collaborative effort between departments. In this one you'll see that there are individuals that are coming in from engineering, from operations, and even finance that are helping to support the efforts that you'll hear more about. And those projects that we have shared with you again back in January 19th, Finance and Administration Committee, when we talked about the budget priorities. These were some of the ones that we identified: an emergency response plan, the MBR projects, the cost of service, the interconnection feasibility study, and also the groundwater augmentation. So again, you'll hear more about those particular information later on. If we can go on to the next slide, page 36 of your packet. Again, this is your side-by-side comparison. So similar to what we had the actual for 2021, the projected for 21-22, the adopted budget for 21-22, and then our proposed budget. I will say this is one of those budgets in which you can't necessarily compare one year to the next year, because our efforts do vary from year to year, depending upon where the district is. And this is where we see ourselves sort of seeing where we're visioning ourselves going forward. I know that the board is contemplating an updated sort of strategic plan to understand sort of where West Basin fits into the region and how we can all work together with that. And so that's why you see sort of variability in this particular budget. There was an anticipated payment that we thought was going to go to the City of Los Angeles. Again, that's currently under discussion. You'll hear more about that. That's why you see the budget projected numbers for fiscal year 21-22 as much lower than anticipated as we sort of navigate through this discussion here. Let's please move over to the next slide, which is page 37.
Margaret, I apologize. Director Alvarez, did you have a quick question? I saw you had a hand raised.
I was just gonna, it's also coming up in the next slide, so I'll just wait till the
Okay.
next slide and ask my question.
So on this slide here, one of the things too we wanted to do, you saw it also in the recycle water operations, but you'll see it here in the other program budgets, trying to break down sort of where the costs are. Again, we've been very programmatic based with the board, you know, saying how much are we spending on each of these costs here, but really where are those costs being spent? Is it labor time? Is it direct party costs that you see here? And that's to give you sort of an idea here. So in this particular one, the biggest wedge, of course, is that if we do move forward with that MBR project with the City of Los Angeles, that is the predominant number if you see within this budget here. Now, we've also shared with you the last 4 years where this budget has been. And again, these are just budgeted dollars. So you can see how it's fluctuated over that period of time based off, again, what was anticipated in each of those fiscal years. Lastly, as I also mentioned at the recycle water operations, we have a breakdown of our full-time equivalent employee count. You see that noted in the blue box at the bottom. You can see that the level of effort has increased in fiscal year 22-23, and because it associates to the number of studies that are there. Again, that is a mix of both direct and indirect labor here. So again, no one individual is necessarily dedicated to this project. It's a fraction of individual times that make up this time here. And with that, I see Director Alvarez has a question, and I'll open it up to him for his comment.
Okay, Margaret, my question was specifically to that on the FTE. I understand it's just different staff people working on it, but that's quite a bit of additional labor that's going to be dedicated to this versus the past years. So you don't necessarily have to have the answer to this, but I would appreciate to know why we're more than doubling the labor effort that's required in terms of FTE. I'm not saying there's not more work required.
Sure. Well, and I will say that part of it depends upon sort of the studies that are there. So for instance, one of the projects that you hear about is the cost of service study. So typically I would not charge directly to individual project. I would be considered one of those indirect costs that would just be allocated based off of level of effort that you would see towards other things. But in this particular case, myself and a couple other from my team will have a fraction of our time that will be spent on that cost of service study that's there. I would note that if there are any particular projects that you said, oh, I don't think we want to do this project or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean that that labor dollar goes away. It just means it gets reallocated somewhere else. So again, we have what our employee count is. We're just showing that where that level of effort is going. Is it going to be more towards technical planning type projects? Is it going to be more towards recycle operations, public information, education? Those are the kind of things that you'll see us, shifting, if you will, as decisions are made as to where you like us to spend our effort on. And so that gives you one example, but there are other examples. We have some engineers that are spending some time on some projects here that rather than spending it sort of on a capital infrastructure project, these are future focused, if you will, projects that will be perhaps a capital project in the future, but our engineers are spending time here on these items, if you will. And that's probably my best guess or best answer for you at this time. We can certainly give you more detail about who are those individuals that would be sharing their time in this area. So increasing it basically a person of time, if you will, from last year to this year when you just look at the direct labor allocation. And with that, hopefully that answers your question. I'm done with the slide, and I'd be happy to now move it over to Barkev, who will carry the balance of the conversation.
Thank you, Margaret. And again, good morning, directors. As Margaret mentioned, I'll be touching a little bit more, going into a little bit more detail on some of the technical planning efforts and projects that are being proposed. Hopefully we can get some good feedback from the board. The first one on deck is the emergency response plan. An emergency response plan, or an ERP, describes an agency's strategies, the resources and plans and procedures in response to man-made or natural incidences or disasters, flooding, earthquakes, contamination, cyber attacks, if you will. What we've done in the past is that we have prepared emergency response plans in the past at West Basin that reflect the conditions of that time. Our contract operators themselves have emergency response plans for certain facilities. What we want to do with this effort is to take a fresh look and combine the emergency response plans under one roof. Also looking into what is West Basin's specific roles when it comes to a met emergency. So we'd like to engage our stakeholders, whether it's our customers or whether it's Metropolitan, to define that role as some of the other agencies have that. This coincides with this federal bill that passed in 2018, the American Water Infrastructure Act, that basically changed the format of emergency response plans for potable and wastewater systems. What we'd like to do is, similar to what other agencies have done, is to conform and be consistent with those requirements. On the next slide, which is page 39 of your package, you'll see a little bit of a schedule and an outline of the key scope items that's proposed for the preparation of this plan, along with the budget and consultants. This breakdown here in the table, you'll see a certain amount for the consultant assistant that we think we would need, but you see a higher budget for the staff members. This is one of those studies, as Margaret mentioned, like the cost sort of study, where there would be multiple departments involved in the preparation of the plan itself, and that's why this cost of labor is up, and that reflects on the FTE calculations. I'll stop for a moment. Dr. Alvarez, you have a question?
My first question is, we have an emergency response plan in place today, right?
We have a draft one, West Basin draft one, and then we have a separate specific one for just the facility, the ECL.
Okay, so we have a draft plan, but that's what we rely on. So we're reallocating staff to doing this effort and spending more money on consultants. Not quite sure, maybe you can expand what exactly is going to be provided by this plan that necessitates that it be done the way you're proposing to do it now.
Sure. Let me bring in Operations Manager Uzi Daniel to explain a little bit more of the details.
Great. Thank you, Barkev. Yeah, it's a good question, because we actually have a lot of various emergency response plans. OSHA requires some for employees, and I know that throughout my career, I used to wear a safety and OSHA hat at some of my other water jobs. It can get confusing between the two versus a community response. So what we plan to do with this is comply, or conform is the better word, with some of the new requirements. What that requires is what's called a risk and resiliency program. That requires some outside expertise. We actually are planning to do this quite thrifty. We're proud of this. We want to have the risk and resiliency plan done with the outside expertise, but a lot of, whether it's Central Basin, City of Santa Monica, a lot of groups have just farmed out the entire thing. What we want to do then is to take that information and put all of our safety plans together under one roof and build our own safety emergency response plan. Because as we learned with the upset, if we build it, we will know how to fix it. No one knows better than all the people who respond on what is needed and what the reality of an emergency situation is. So we want to try to be efficient, use a little bit of outside expertise, but then build it in-house and eventually be able to expand it with the help of MWD's plans. We're already on some of those working groups, the county, and really be just a part of all of our district, all the communities, see what we can do. I'll give an example that I think a lot of the directors would appreciate. If there was some catastrophic event in Southern California or when, we have people certified as operators. We could sit at a control board. We could be a part of our community, but that has to be put in a plan if it came to that. And in the meantime, some of these other things are just a matter of looking at your risk of upsets, different things, and getting them in one spot. And then in addition, having that as a conforming document required by the Infrastructure Act.
If you don't mind, can you give me, send me a copy of the specific act that you're referring to that says that we are required to have this plan at this time, and that our existing plans or the plans of other agencies don't overlap and already fulfill that requirement? Thank you.
Of course.
And Uzi, just want to comment on that. The requirements are mainly for potable wastewater systems, correct? And if our intention is to conform with those requirements. We're not, if we were a potable or a wastewater system, we should have prepared this plan about a year ago. It should have been done. But because we're not looking because it is absolutely required. But what other agencies have done, like MODOC, like Central Basin, is that they've looked at this act and they've aimed to comply with its requirements, the requirements that they pose. But we'll be happy to kind of address your request and get you what those exact requirements are.
And Barkip,
and I appreciate your clarification that we are not a portable water system and that we are not required necessarily to have such a plan in place. Thank you. Send me the information.
And I'll send one clarification. Central Basin was actually required. The EPA can request at any time. So they were actually required within 6 months to prepare one, just for clarification.
Okay. Thanks, Susie. Okay, so that's the emergency response plan. On to the next slide, which is packet page 40. As Margaret mentioned, this particular budget for this effort is the biggest piece of the pie for our next proposals, and that is the Hyperion MBR pilot study. Board members, we've presented to you on several occasions some of the status of this particular project, but what we'll do is just do a quick overview again before we get into some of the discussions and details. So, every month as part of the Engineering Operations Committee, we start the operations update slide with the water quality coming into Hyperion and how that water quality impacts our production, how it impacts our operational costs. And we look at the spikes going up, and we're happy when the turbidity levels are going down, and we talk about some of the upsets. West Basin has struggled with that effluent water quality for a long time. And what West Basin staff and city staff have done in the past is they come together and look at the options. So back in 2010, Hyperion prepared numerous studies to look into what options are out there to improve the water quality. They looked at several scenarios and ultimately leaned towards an MBR option. That eventually culminated into an agreement between three parties, LADWP, LA San, and West Basin, to look into putting together a pilot study and to better examine the use of MBR and get regulatory approval for its use for IPR, indirect potable reuse, and direct potable reuse applications in the future. So the agreement was signed with West Basin in January 2018. As part of that agreement, the three agencies were to fund a $13.2 million effort in the pilot study, $4.4 million per agency. And the program commenced in 2018. However, about a year from its signing in 2019, there was the announcement of the city's intention to proceed with Operation Next and Hyperion and the program at Hyperion 2035, and both those programs aim to recycle 100% of the effluent from Hyperion. So the goals of the city somewhat were recalibrated about a year in, and so if we can switch to the next slide. Since then, we've been discussing, West Basin staff, city staff have been discussing at multiple occasions, staff at different levels on seeing how this potential study will be used moving forward. Because originally it was meant to provide 70 million gallons per day to West Basin system, and West Basin would direct a portion of that back to the city. And now there's this more holistic look at treating all the sewer that's coming into Hyperion. So the goals of the study from the city's end have been recalibrated or refocused on Operation Next and Hyperion 2035. The schedule has been pushed back a little bit for several factors. We were originally aiming to complete the pilot study by December 2021. And the projected completion right now is December 2024. The costs of the study have gone up from $13.2 million to now $24.2 million. Wow. And the ask, that's an $11 million increase. And the ask of West Basin is if we were to proceed with amending the original contract or coming up with a new agreement, we're looking at potentially increasing our contribution from 4.4 to $6.2 million. And that would be a proportion of the 70 MGD that we originally intended. If you take the 70 MGD that was the intention to go to West Basin over the 272 million gallons per day that the city plans to recycle, that would be the proportion of the cost that is equivalent to $6.2 million. So we have paid into the program $1 million a couple of years ago. We were projected to pay more, but the new agreement and the amendment stalled, and so we didn't end up paying the money this fiscal year. If the assumption here is that we would continue with the program, and that is an assumption. And if we were to do that, $5.2 million is what we think would need to be paid in the next fiscal year. And that is currently incorporated into the technical planning budget. We can proceed on the next slide, which is on packet page 42. So this is a separate effort. We're calling this the cost of service and rate study. As you know, directors, our recycled water that we use for irrigation, the rate for recycled water is basically in such a way where it provides, it's a certain increment lower than the potable water rates. And historically, it's been that way to provide incentive for customers to connect to recycled water. When it comes to the recycled water that we produce and deliver to the refineries, those rates have are are somewhat structured in the agreements themselves. And so some of these agreements are going to be coming for renewal pretty soon. The Torrance Refinery is up for renewal in 2023. The Chevron agreements in 2024 and 27. The Marathon agreement is coming up in 2025. So this effort here, this study, the objective of it is to look at the cost, the O&M costs at recycled water, take a fresh look at it, get some third-party expertise to come in and weigh in on not only the O&M costs, but what we are projecting and thinking what we're going to spend on a refurbishment, on replacements coming up. Take that into consideration to come up with some sort of a projection of what the district's cost may be in the next few years. And if you can go on to the next slide on page 43, one other factor here is if we are looking at getting MBR water from the city of LA at some point, one of the things that this study will look into is what would that mean for us as West Basin, and what would that mean for our customer? Uzi earlier in the operations update showed a dollar value of somewhere north of $300,000, and that's the cost that we pay the city for that effluent today at $7.50 per acre foot. Obviously, with MBR water coming in, those costs would increase, and we'd like to get the proposal here is to be able to estimate how would that impact the cost of producing recycled water, not only for our refinery customers, but overall for our Purple Pipe customers.
Or Kev, I think Desi has a question.
Dr. Alvarez, please.
I have a question / comment on this one. I think that one of the things that we've, at least I've had a lot of questions about, and it's always been, what is the cost of producing all of the recycled water that we produce, and versus the revenue that we get in the sales of that water. And I think that there's an imbalance there to our detriment. Our cost of production is not the cost that we're recovering. So albeit we're not in a position to spend a lot of money in this coming year because of just expenses that we've got to face up to, so discretionary spending needs to be limited. But this is probably one of the more important things that we can do in terms of negotiating and adjusting the pricing of our recycled water. The recycled water system should be covering its own costs, and that's, in my opinion, very critical. So this study, I think, is probably, in terms of one of the discretionary expenditure items, an important one. And I would hope that we can find somewhere in the budget some other savings to offset the cost of this study. But it is an important study to do. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment, Dr. Alvarez. Moving on to the next effort on packet page 44. We're calling this study the West Basin Interconnection Feasibility Study. And as part of us preparing the master plan, recently we've had some discussions about the master plan, or the draft master plan, or whatever we're going to call it, is provide some options for the district in terms of where do we go from here in the future. What is West Basin version 3.0? 1.0 being imported water, 2.0 being the recycled water system that we built over the last 25 years. What is next? We've talked several times about the two major regional programs, the one that the City of LA is leading and the one that Metropolitan, along with Los Angeles County Sanitation District, is leading, to produce, each of them to produce 150 MGD in terms of what Met is producing, and potentially even more from the city of LA. We've been in discussions with both agencies and other regional agencies, WRD, City of Torrance, and LA San, to see how can West Basin System be leveraged and utilized to expedite the goals of the regional programs. So what we're proposing to do in this study is to see if we can answer some questions with a certain type of conceptual analysis, try to answer some of that questions. How could West Basin System be used? But also, if it can be used, what are the costs? What does it mean? Both Met and City of LA are looking to define that first phase of their program. What is that first phase? How quick can we get there and get more customers hooked up to, whether it's the IPR project that WRD is seeking, or whether it's something else. So the key goals of this study is to, again, expedite the realization of the regional water reuse goals, potentially offer a more feasible alternative for future infrastructure projects, and then maximize the operational flexibility, specifically for us, as I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So if we can get into the next slide, on packet page 45, this slide and the next slide talk about specific objectives of the potential study. And what we're doing right now is we're putting together these objectives in a draft form. We've met with multiple agencies to get their buy-in. We got some buy-in from Met. We got some buy-in from LA. What we want to do is get this scoped out and then see if they have further input if we were to proceed with this study. So some of the specific objectives would be looking at our Hyperion pump station to see how it can be used to serve the Operation Next program. Back in October, we did a specific presentation to look at the extra capacity that could be available in that pump station. The second bullet here is Edwards C. Little plant. Is there any way that the Edwards C. Little plant can be used or refurbished to meet the Operation Next program goals? We would also, something that we talked with WRD about, look at potentially using one of the satellite plants as a way to serve the groundwater replenishment goals that WRD has. We would also examine or explore if there is, what would it take to get a secondary source of supply to West Basin System from the LA County Sanitation District plant in Carson. And if that would be something that is temporary initially or permanent at some point. We could also look at the MET's conveyance system. One of the things that Metropolitan is asking West Basin to define is how much water, not just West Basin, but other metropolitan agencies, is how much water are you going to need from this 150 MGD of water that we're producing from this program, specifically for the initial phases. So, so earlier we talked about the satellite plants. Could that be means to groundwater replenishment, or is it more cost effective to just wheel the water from Metropolitan System into injection wells to replenish the groundwater at West Coast Basin? The next slide, please, packet page 46. We would look at phasing and supply quantities. We would also look at a potential option of if we were to do something at ECL or use our Hyperion pump station, could there be means for the water to be wheeled through West Basin's north leg of the recycled water system and try to meet the demands, the area demands in Central Basin for the city of LA? And we would also, again, see the refinery customers. We think there's 10 MGD of demands, refinery demands or industrial demands in the harbor area. We will take a second look at that and see whether those are best served or confirm that they're best served from Metropolitan's proposed system. So there are several questions here, and there is some sort of a time frame for multiple agencies. So this would, if we proceed with this would be an aggressive effort to answer some of the questions at a very high level, given the time that we have, and see if those questions can lead into potential agreements or a certain policy that West Basin would adopt, and that could help shape the future of West Basin moving forward. On to the next effort, package page 45. So I touched on this a little bit on the previous slide, is that the ability to potentially use West Basin satellite plants as a way to replenish more recycled water into the ground. What WRD is hoping to do is to get another 10 to 20,000 acre feet per year into the West Coast Basin. And they are evaluating where injection wells could be placed. They're also evaluating where the source can come from. And one of the potential options here for everybody to look at is from Hyperion into West Basin system to West Basin satellite plant, where the water could be treated to drinking water standards as required, and then put back into the ground. And so for this groundwater augmentation feasibility study, we're looking at, again, evaluating options for that. Is the Torrance plant better? Is the Carson plant a better area to do this? And if so, what would the costs of doing something like this be? The master plan estimated some costs on a super high level. What we're proposing here to do is take that to the next step and look into details just a little bit further to give clarification and also help shape the West Basin's direction, again, moving forward. So the groundwater augmentation feasibility study is that effort. On the next slide, on packet page 46, you can see some of the goals: investigate alternative treatment facility locations, technologies, prepare conceptual layouts, and propose pipeline alignments, look at the brine line and how much it could handle and some of the other factors that go into this, and then prepare a cost estimate for the study. And we do think that we there might be some potential grant funding opportunities for the implementation of this study. That concludes the studies that we have in the technical planning program. We glad to answer any questions that the board may have.
Mr. Chair.
Director Houston?
Sure. Actually, Kev, can you go back to that last slide you just did? It had a little map on it real quick.
It's packet page 47, this one?
One more. There you go. Yeah, that one. I'm just curious because it's obviously very small, but what exactly is that blue line down there in Palos Verdes kind of going around the coast? What is that?
Yeah, good question. So this exhibit is from our master plan, and it was really meant to highlight the circle, the gray circle in the middle that talks about right. The IPR.
Sure.
But yes, you can see the master plan looked at different alternatives, right? One option was an IPR focused program, and that's what this is. The groundwater augmentation is an IPR focused program. But and there was another option that focused on purple pipe. I apologize, but this exhibit shows both options in here.
Oh,
so,
that's okay. It's okay. Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting.
The blue pipe is a reference to a purple pipe potential project one day if funding is available. But
and where was this at? This is in our master plan, you said?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I could go look at the master plan booklet and see that, right? This map. I believe. Yep. Okay, cool. I'll look back at that. Really quick, I just wanted to say a few comments. at the end here is I'm very pleased to see us looking at these feasibility studies. I think this is very important. I think it's money well spent that we we need to look at this. Now's the time to do it. So for what it's worth, in my opinion, I think this is excellent that we're bringing this forward. Just kind of flipping through my pages here for 1 second. You know, the interconnection feasibility study. But going back and more, just for me, was the cost of service and the rate study. I think that's also extremely important to really, at this point, in my mind, have an outside expertise come in and look at it, like you mentioned, Barkev, because you know, obviously the district's been doing what it's been doing for many years, and I think now is the time for us really to have some outside consultant or counsel to look at it and really, you know, fresh set of eyes, yeah, but also for the board to better understand it. I need to better understand how we've priced the water in the past and how we can look at it going forward. So I'm actually really anxious to see how that plays out as far as that goes. So as far as the 3 different studies you brought forward, I think that this is the time to do it. Perfect timing as we're really talking about regional partnerships. So that's that. And then the one last thing, I also just want to say thank you for the updates on Hyperion with that NBR study. I'm definitely looking forward to where that's going, but that's an extremely important item for West Basin to consider and how we continue to be a partner on that. So I know that's down the road a little bit. So those are my comments, and I just want to say thank you for the reports.
Thank you, directors.
Any other comments? I guess not. Thank you. Mr. General Manager, we're on item 7, closed session. Is there a closed session?
Mr. President, there are no closed session items today.
All right. Or director's comments. Directors, do you have any comments?
This is.
No, thank you, Director.
Thank you, Director Gray. Director Houston?
Yeah, I just had a couple things. One is, I don't know if staff got to it yet, but when we did our meeting back on February 23rd, I had asked for some like some spreadsheets or what have you from our memberships and sponsorship expenditures versus, you know, budget versus actual. I don't know if you sent it to me or I missed it, but just reminding you to please send those to the board. And I wanted to get hard copies when you do, printed copies. So just reminding you, if I missed it, just resend it to me. But I just don't recall.
Director Houston?
Yeah?
Director Houston, that spreadsheet is pending right now. I was waiting for Mr. Charlie Wilson to respond to me related to the Southern California Water Coalition. He actually called and texted me during this meeting. He's sending me information. I will gather that information, and that was the final piece that we were waiting for, and so we will get that out.
Okay, perfect. So we're waiting on Charlie. Very good. Okay, cool. And the second thing is, and I thought Mr. Lamb brought up a really good point, because I don't have time to follow the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission. I think I get some emails from them somehow on their agendas or what have you, but I just don't have time to follow them. But I do know we are obviously a part of that. So food for thought, I think we should have some way for staff to let the board know what's going on with that commission. I never hear any reports. I never hear anything. So I'd really like you guys to think about how can you provide the information as to what they're doing to this board, whether that's a written, you know, report or note, or you want to do something at our board meeting. But in all the years I've been on this board, I really have not been aware of what they're doing unless I read their stuff myself. So I would ask that we do that, please.
Okay.
And that's it.
Director Gray?
Hi. Yes, I had to get off, but is Director Scott, the Director Houston talked about the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission?
Yes.
Is that, yes, all right. Perhaps we can do a verbal report every month or so if that's what the board would require. I know Mr. Caldwell is the backup person to me on the board, so he's normally there all the time, I believe, and I'm there some of the time, so we can provide some report if that's what the board requests.
Either oral or written would be adequate.
I would be happy
I
with
would
that.
think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Any other director's comments? Dr. Alvarez?
I think we covered some materials. I've kind of expressed my concerns. I'm very concerned about increasing any expenditures. I'd like to see us go back, look at what we can do to generate budget savings. And I understand we're constrained on issues like chemical costs, which are basically beyond what frustrating as that is. We're being also phased, that hasn't been discussed much or discussed at all, with the exception of the presentation that was made at the Med Caucus meeting. Metropolitan Water District is going to be increasing their water rates by 8% this year and next year. That's a 16% increase over 2 years. And that's likely something that we're going to need to address. And that in itself is a big add-on to our existing rates if we pass those through. So I'm very concerned about the overall budget and the expenditures. Some have control, don't, and we have control. I really would like us to see us exercise control and reduce our overall expenditures.
Thank you, Director. Any other comments? Director Houston, go ahead.
Sure. Really, one more thing I just thought of too. We were talking in the first presentation about the laboratory or the labs, and I don't have enough information to understand the full context of that at this time. So when you all bring that back, as I think Director Alvarez mentioned, I would like to understand better, what is the benefit of having the lab on site versus if everything was outsourced, and maybe how other agencies also might handle that, or other plants, just for our own edification. I think that's really important, because I do understand what Director Alvarez was mentioning on many things you can obviously outsource, but we also need to hear what's the perspective of continuing to have an operation on site. So when you bring it back, I'd just love to see a little more information, because again, I wouldn't know what you really need or don't need. So I want to say thank you for that information, Uzi.
Thank you. Any other comments, Director Williams? Guess not. Oh, he's aboard. If there are no further agenda items, we will adjourn. Our next regular meeting is March 29th. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, President Deere, members of the board and staff.